Under the soft July sun in Gurugram, as the kitchen clock ticked just past 10:30 am on July 10th, 2025, a quiet home in Sushant Lok echoed with gunfire. A promising young tennis coach, just 25, lay still on the kitchen floor, her dreams cut short in broad daylight. She had played for India, coached the next generation, laughed with friends hours before she died. And then she was gone. No intruder broke in, no stranger fled the scene. The truth would unearth a betrayal far more devastating. This morning of unspeakable tragedy shattered a family, stunned a nation, and ignited urgent conversation about autonomy, patriarchy, and violence against women. This is the story of that July morning and that one girl that has taken India by storm. This is the story of Radhika Yadav. Hi everyone, welcome to the Desi Crime Podcast, a show where we dive deep into some of the craziest cases from around South Asia. I'm your host Ishwarya.
And I'm Aryan.
And the case that I have for you today is one that is probably all over your social media feeds because it has ignited national fury.
Ishwarya, we tend not to cover recent cases. We try to, wait for the investigation to unfold to give you guys a good, overview of what actually happened. But I requested Ishwarya to cover this case because when I first saw it on my Instagram feed, it took me back to the most gut-wrenching case we have ever covered, in my opinion, Radhika Yadav.
Yes.
I know how much I've cried when we covered it. The comment section to that video is filled with people saying they couldn't even finish the video.
Yeah.
Radhika Yadav was an aspiring tennis student.
Yes.
It also happened in Haryana. And this case of this tennis coach.
And while there may not be parallels in terms of the modus operandi and this, that, the other thing, they were both very tragic cases of systemic violence against women.
Against women, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, the patriarchy, sort of a trite word used, on both sides to dismiss each other.
Yeah.
Both were figments of patriarchy.
100%.
And this too is. And this case boils my blood beyond any, and I thought nobody better than you can cover it. Before we begin with this case, I would like to read something from our book that's going to be out 19th August. You can pre-order it right now, link in description. But this case reminded me of one of the lines we wrote in our acknowledgement. And I think it's cases like these that remind me of this particular line. The final line in our acknowledgement section is, "This book is dedicated to the victims and their families. Desi crime is nothing if not for their stories."
July 10th, 2025 was a Thursday. The sun in Gurugram had risen early, casting long shadows over the gated lanes of Sushant Lok. By 10 am, the neighborhood was beginning to hum. Auto rickshaws had taken school children, shops had opened up and began to bustle, and the air smelled faintly of morning dust and boiling chai. On one such quiet lane, behind cream-colored boundary walls, sat the Yadav household. 2 stories, 3 generations, and one young woman trying to breathe freely within it. Radhika Yadav was 25, a state-level tennis champion, a daughter, a coach, and that morning, like many before it, she was in the kitchen. She'd woken up early, maybe out of habit from years of early practice. The kitchen, located on the first floor, was warm with the smell of oil heating in a pan. Her mother Manju was in another room, resting. She'd been under the weather for the past few days. Her father Deepak was also inside the house. Downstairs, her uncle Kuldeep and cousin Piyush were going about their day, unaware that in just a few minutes, the entire course of their family's history would rupture beyond recognition. Around 10:30 am, a sound ripped through the house. Loud, metallic, piercing. Kuldeep, on the ground floor, froze. For a second, he thought it might have been a tire bursting outside. But the sound echoed again, then again, and again. Multiple distinct cracks. Gunshots. Upstairs. He ran and his son Piyush followed. They bolted up the stairs, hearts pounding, unaware of the sight that would meet them. The kitchen door was ajar, and inside, Radhika lay on the floor. Kuldeep would later recount in a trembling voice, quote, "I saw my niece Radhika lying in a pool of blood in the kitchen. My son Piyush also rushed up. We picked her up and rushed her in our car to the hospital, end quote. There were no signs of a struggle, no shouting, no screams, just stillness and a spreading pool of red on the kitchen tiles. Near her body was a revolver, her father's. Reports on this vary hugely, but the most commonly reported one is that the weapon had discharged 5 rounds, out of which 4 had struck Radhika in the back. Manju, her mother, emerged moments later, visibly shaken and disoriented. She would later tell investigators that she had heard the noise but assumed it was a pressure cooker blast. A mistake born out of routine, a familiar sound reinterpreted through the veil of denial. Only when she saw her daughter's motionless body did she realize the truth. Piyush and Kuldeep didn't wait. They lifted Radhika's limp body and drove to Asia Maringo Hospital in Sector 56. A short distance, but a long, frantic drive. But by the time they reached the emergency room, the doctors could only confirm what her blood-soaked clothes had already suggested. Radhika Yadav, 25 years old, fierce, gifted, full of promise, was dead on arrival. The hospital report was clinical. The bullet wounds were fatal. Time of death, moments before arrival. Radhika, whose arms had lifted countless trophies and guided dozens of students, was now being wheeled through hospital corridors covered by a white sheet. There was no coming back. In just 10 minutes, a life had ended. A daughter was lost. A mother was broken. A house turned silent with horror. No one saw it coming. Not her neighbors, who described Radhika as polite and focused. Not her students, who remembered her giving lessons the day before with her usual precision and warmth. Not even her closest friends. At least not fully. And yet in hindsight, there were signs. Quote, "She told me she didn't feel safe at home. It was suffocating her," her best friend would later say to the Times of India. But that morning, in her home where she felt unsafe, like I said, there was no fight, no raised voice, just a quiet breakfast underway, until there wasn't. Back at the house, neighbors had gathered outside. Word had spread fast. An ambulance arrived and the home gates stood open. A once private home now transformed into the site of a national tragedy. In the span of a single morning, a woman who had conquered courts across the country had been gunned down in her own kitchen, in her own home. Not by a stranger, not by an outsider, but by the very man who had once held her in his arms as an infant, the man who taught her how to ride a bicycle, the man she called Dad. And to see how we got here, we'll have to go back in time. Radhika Yadav was born on the 23rd of March 2000 in Gurugram in Haryana. She was the only daughter of Deepak and Manju Yadav, a builder and a homemaker respectively. Her family was modest but comfortable, with land and some real estate in and around the city. Her brother Dheeraj would go on to join their father in the family property business. But Radhika, she chose a different path. From a young age, she showed promise on the court. Not the court of debate or law, but the kind with rackets and lines and green hardtops scorched under the Haryana sun. She picked up a tennis racket in school and just never let it go. By the time she was 17, Radhika had broken into the All India Tennis Association's under-18 top 75 ranking. She spent 11 weeks among India's top 100 junior singles players, eventually climbing to number 53 in women's doubles by 2021. She played matches across the country, facing opponents double her size, but never double her heart. And in 2024, she flew to Tunisia to play the International Tennis Federation's W15 tournament, which is basically their women's tournament with $15,000 in prize money. There, she earned points on the global women's circuit and broke into the ITF doubles 200. Her ranking, 113. Her dream, Wimbledon. But like so many women in sports, Radhika's ascent wasn't without its setbacks. A shoulder injury later that year forced her off the competitive circuit, but she wasn't giving up just yet. She pivoted. Radhika returned home not to retire, but to reinvent herself. As a coach, she opened her own tennis academy in Sector 67 Gurugram, where she trained students from all walks of life, many of them underprivileged, many of them girls just like her. She taught with precision. She inspired with calm. Her students said she cared as much about who they were as how they played. But despite the accolades, as a person, she was private. Her Instagram page was private, followed by just 68 people. She wasn't chasing fame, just posting videos of warm-ups, forehand drills, and once a short music video titled Karwan. In the age of curated performance, Radhika was quietly building a legacy. Her coach Manoj Bhardwaj remembered her as focused, humble and talented. A disciplined girl with no airs, no fuss and every reason to boast. Radhika wasn't rebellious either. She wasn't loud. She was a quiet, graceful force, pushing against the walls around her one practice session at a time. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known though, was just how much those walls were pushing back. To many, this brewing tension is visible now, in retrospect, in family photographs. In every photograph, Deepak Yadav, her father, appears the same: stern, unsmiling, square-shouldered, always a step behind his daughter. He was, by all outward accounts, a proud father of the daughter he'd raised. But pride, in his case, had begun to twist itself into something far more corrosive. For years, Deepak had kept a firm grip on the rhythms of the household. He decided what was bought, what was said, and who was listened to. And for a time, Radhika obeyed those boundaries. She trained hard, studied harder, and returned home before dark. But when her career began to grow, and with it her independence, that grip began to tighten, not loosen as it rightly should. At home, her success became a source of conflict. Her growing independence, managing her own money, running a business, making her own decisions, triggered friction. Deepak began to pull tighter. He controlled what she wore, who she spoke to, how long she was allowed out. Friends remember how things started to change. There were rules about everything. According to her friends, her father even monitored her call logs and tracked her phone location. Her best friend Himanshika would later say, quote, "She felt suffocated. She said they tracked her phone. They wanted her to stop coaching, to stop dressing the way she did, to stop living," end quote. At one point, her father allegedly demanded that she share her Instagram password with him so he could see what she was posting, and more importantly, who was watching. He told her when to sleep and how to breathe, Himanshika said. She wasn't allowed to live like other women her age. She was always being watched, she added. Deepak, those close to the family say, couldn't tolerate the idea of his daughter being the family's primary earner. Neighbors in the village whispered behind his back, mocking that the father was living off his daughter. And in a culture where patriarchal pride is both currency and curse, those words landed like stones. At first, he told her to shut down the academy. He said coaching was not for girls, that she was exposing herself to strangers, that the family name was being tarnished. She refused. Then came the accusations. He said she was being too friendly with male students, too visible on social media, too modern for a girl from their background. And yet, Radhika kept going. Even when neighbors began to whisper, even when villagers mocked her father, even when that music video she uploaded to Instagram, Karwa, barely 30 seconds, sparked local gossip. Because in her mind, she had worked too hard, fought too long. She wasn't going to shrink herself to fit anyone's idea of obedient, even if that person was her own father. But choices like those, in families like hers, don't go unnoticed. Not for long. The trigger, some claimed, was that brief Instagram reel, and others pointed to the music video in which she had a cameo. But those explanations were too small to account for the violence that followed. Because this wasn't about a single video or a passing clip. It was about power, about control slipping through the fingers of a man who had come to believe that his daughter's freedom was a threat. What is perhaps most chilling is that none of it appeared sudden. According to her best friend, Deepak had been planning it. In the days before the shooting, he had reportedly stopped speaking to Radhika entirely. He was withdrawn, cold, and deliberate. And on the morning of the murder, after the shots were fired and Radhika lay bleeding on the kitchen floor, he didn't scream, he didn't run, he didn't cry. He just sat there, the friend said. Quote, he had no remorse. It was like he'd done what he set out to do, end quote. In the days that followed, public outrage would surge, with many asking how a man could kill his own daughter for wanting a life of her own. But for those who knew them, the more urgent question was why no one stopped him sooner. Why, despite her whispers for help, her careful navigation of family control, her desperate balancing act between tradition and independence, no one stepped in to protect her from the danger that lived under her own roof. Because Deepak Yadav didn't snap, he decided. And Radhika paid the price for a father's need to silence the one thing he could no longer command, her freedom. Back in Gurugram, and as news began to spread across the country, all people knew was that a 25-year-old girl was dead, and brutally so. At Asia Moringa Hospital, doctors pronounced her dead on arrival, and throughout the day, chants of disbelief rose outside the cremation ground in Wazirabad village, where her students, some only teenagers, laid flowers at her bier, departed in silence, and saw the gates to her makeshift coaching space closed forever. Almost immediately after the forensic teams finished their work inside the Yadav home, police began piecing together the morning's horror with chilling efficiency. Detectives entering the home noted the .32 bore revolver lying on the floor, its 5 cartridges empty, a weapon registered to Deepak Yadav himself, now tied to this tragedy. Inside the kitchen, officers confirmed what the family knew. This was not a shootout, it was an execution. Deepak remained in the house. Rather than fleeing or screaming in shock, he spoke. and he confessed. In his statement to the police, he said he had repeatedly warned his daughter to shut down her tennis academy, accusing her of disrespecting the family and embarrassing him by allowing, quote, villagers to taunt him for living off of her earnings, end quote. When she refused, he said, he believed he had no choice but to use his revolver, and he didn't hesitate. Investigators seized the gun, the spent cartridges, and began analyzing Radhika's mobile phone, which Deepak said he had monitored for weeks. Meanwhile, the post-mortem clarified that the fatal wounds were consistent with shots fired at a close range, adding forensic clarity to the narrative his confession had already laid out. As the police processed statements and evidence, media outlets promptly pursued layers of narrative. Was this prompted by an Instagram reel, a music video cameo, or something deeper? But the Gurgaon police clamped down on these rumors. They rejected any speculation that her brief foray into the music video Karwa had been the spark, with subsequent evidence suggesting that in fact Radhika's father had approved her appearance in the music video and even, quote, liked the song, according to her music video co-star Inamul Haq. Her father's simmering anger, they said, stemmed not from that creative project, but from this, the relentless drip of financial dependence and the erosion of his patriarchal status, magnified by the taunts he had increasingly begun to hear.
You know what's a simpler solution to that than killing your daughter?
There are lots, but...
Don't use the money.
Right.
Don't use the money.
But that requires letting your daughter live on her own, like...
As
long as she's entangled in the home.
There's a nice English phrase for this. Stop being a little bitch.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Her dad's a little bitch.
Yeah.
Don't censor that. That's just what it is.
I agree.
You are the most insecure. Or the words
the most infantile. Yeah.
Just the words I feel like saying towards him will get this video demonetized.
Right.
I hate him.
But I feel you. And I'm sure all of you can too. Moreover, the police and her family have explicitly rejected any theory that this was one of those anxiety-driven spur-of-the-moment crimes. Rather, this was planned honor-based violence, a twisted logic that declared, quote, if I cannot control her, then I will silence her, end quote. Following his confession, Deepak told investigators that time and time again he found himself unable to reclaim that position of authority. And each moment she refused to be silenced, he felt humiliated before the world. He said she didn't listen to me anymore, admitting to the collapse of paternal power that wounded his pride so deeply that he could not take it anymore, his own words. And so the Gurugram police was clear. The real dispute, as Deepak himself confessed, was over Radhika's academy, her earnings, her independence, her very existence, and that the suggestion of love jihad or impropriety were both inappropriate and unsubstantiated. The family was thrown into turmoil. Radhika's mother Manju, devastated, refused to comment initially. Dheeraj Yadav, her brother, demanded a full CBI investigation and urged the police not to hurry the process, which is rare. Her friends and students stood outside the police station praying for justice and for a narrative that would tell the truth both about Radhika and her father. On the economic and social fronts, the Gurugram Tennis Academy, where she taught, became a shrine of sorts. Young students laid flowers at the gate, coaches voiced outrage and grief, and local authorities promised crackdown on honor-based violence. Women's groups in Delhi and beyond seized on Radhika's story as emblematic of a deeper crisis, the idea that autonomy, education, and earnings might be punished with fatal consequences at home. Public reaction was swift and overwhelming. Local tennis federations lit up social media with tributes to one of their brightest talents. Women's rights organizations ramped up calls against honor-based violence, and ordinary citizens in Delhi shared their horror at a tragedy that unfortunately felt too familiar. Her best friend Himanshika shared a haunting message on Instagram. Quote, Radhika was my best friend. She didn't deserve to die like this. She was bright, kind, full of dreams. This should never have happened. End quote.
मैं कल उसके घर गई हूँ तो मुझे पता चला है कि एक्चुअली उसका मर्डर पिछले 3 दिनों से प्लान हो रहा था. He waited for the right moment और पीछे से मार दिया. मतलब 5 गोलियां कौन सा बाप मारता है, मुझे तो ये समझ में नहीं आ रहा. इतना उसने क्या ही करा था.
Her words echoed across platforms, becoming a refrain for thousands who recognized that the tragedy belonged to more than one family. It belonged to a generational reckoning. As the investigation deepened, forensic reports backed up the confession, communication analysis supported the allegations of surveillance, and village testimony confirmed rumors of taunts leveled at Deepak. The atmosphere in Gurugram shifted overnight, from the hum of an ordinary Delhi suburb to a heavy silence punctuated by grief and disbelief. Her uncle Kuldeep lodged the first information report at Sector 56 police station, naming Deepak as the accused. And from that moment, Radhika's world cascaded into tragedy and public scrutiny. Deepak was produced before a Gurugram court the next day, remanded to 1-day police custody, and soon after into 14-day judicial custody, marking the beginning of legal proceedings. With Deepak's confession recorded, forensic findings confirmed, and digital evidence underway, Gurugram police declared the case open and shut. In the wake of her death, questions remain though. What happens to the children who saw her as their coach, now left without her lessons? What becomes of her mother, who suffered alone that morning? And what of all the daughters whose voices still tremble under watching eyes and tightening cages? Radhika's story did not end the morning she died. It became a mirror into unseen corners of patriarchal power, misogyny dressed as tradition, and a nation forced to consider how home can sometimes be the most dangerous place of all. Because Radhika Yadav's case was not an isolated one. Her murder, like countless others, sits as a cruel pattern that has long gone under-acknowledged in India. While the world recoiled at the notion that a father could kill his own daughter, the truth is that patriarchal pressure to preserve family honor too often translates into lethal control, a control so deep that daughters are punished for asserting autonomy, the most fundamental of human needs.
If you like what we do here at Desi Studios and absolutely love what we're wearing today, this is merch you can go buy all for yourself.
You can buy this Desi Crime merch in our YouTube store on the link down below at Karak Merch. Keep the engines at Desi Studios rolling so we can pay our videographer right behind the camera to make these amazing episodes just for you.